Okay, hello and welcome to our Wednesday night live stream. I am your host, Dana Morningstar, and today is April 3rd, 2019. So if you are new here, welcome. And if you are returning here, welcome. Hello, hooray. Rob, how's everybody doing? I guess before we get really going in the live stream, I just wanted to mention I saw a really disturbing documentary yesterday. It's called The Hunting Grounds, and it's about sexual assault on college campuses. And it was beyond disturbing. I was just shocked as to the level of cover up, the lack of police involvement, how much information was intentionally buried. I just was shocked, just absolutely shocked by it. So it was, very disturbing. I'm not sure if I'd recommend it to anybody that's already traumatized, but it was still very interesting all the same. And there were two women in the documentary that had been raped on campus. They'd started their own group, and I forget the name of it, but it was just so cool. I was so impressed with them. They were so young and so determined and had gone through so much, and the school had gone to all of these great lengths to really silence them. So it was interesting. And they had a few different men in there too that had been sexually assaulted on campus, and kind of their experiences with coming forward, and just the typical stuff that survivors of sexual assault hear, all of the victim blaming. And so it was disturbing, but it was interesting. Kamami, Mariposa, Phoenix. Hey, I got Agatha. I'm sorry. I always call her Agatha because that's how it's spelled, but Agatha. She's a good friend of mine and just to set me straight often. So I'm sorry. I love you. I'm so sorry. Okay. Let's see. Sam, Joe, Nmag, Stainless, Teacher Spring. Hey, Lydia. Welcome, welcome. I didn't know you spoke French, Sam. James, the Broviver, is here. Hey, James. How's your channel going? We need to catch up. I haven't talked to you outside of book club stuff in a while. I'd be curious to know if YouTube is everything that you thought it would be. Stainless says it's 58 degrees in Chicago. Woohoo. Yeah, it's 52 degrees in Michigan. So we're just right across the lake from you guys. But yeah, it's gorgeous. Gorgeous. I actually got my car washed today and ran some errands that I'd been putting off because cold weather is not the funnest to be out in. Hey, Lydia asks, oh, James has a channel. Yes, he does. Yes, he does. James, I believe his channel is called James the Broviver. James says, yeah, literally, it's nothing like I thought it would be, but that's okay. Life's a dance and you learn as you go. Yeah, it is. It's definitely a huge learning curve. I haven't made pre-recorded videos in a very long time, and there's been multiple reasons for that. But one of them, well, like I said, there've been multiple reasons for it, but one of them was I just didn't Windows, like my version of Movie Maker, they stopped supporting it. And so I just kind of kept thinking like, well, I'll have to just learn new software. And then that just kept not happening. And I'd get frustrated. And I was watching all kinds of tutorials about it and really trying to figure it out. And I just kept getting stuck. And it was so flippin' frustrating. So I sat down today. I actually called my brother about it last night, and I was so upset. And he had said, he's like, well, Dana, I think you're really making this harder than it is. just sit down with it, with your computer open, and tell yourself that that you can do this, that you can figure this out, that this is not difficult, and just set a timer for 30 minutes and just learn as much as you can about it. So I did that and I actually got pretty far. So I'm excited because I would like to get back to making recorded videos. So hopefully that'll happen here in the near future. Julie says that teacup seems bigger. Yeah, they're huge. I know it seems bigger, but they're just this size. Kay Kobe says, you look like you've lost weight, Dana. I have. And I haven't really been doing anything. I think I just have been really busy. I realized tonight that I ate breakfast, but then for dinner, because I forgot to eat, I grabbed a handful of raisins. So my dinner tonight was a handful of raisins and a cup of tea, which is not good. But yes, so I think I just have been really busy, but I'd like to make it a lifestyle because I'd like to lose about another probably 30 pounds. But I want to develop a healthy relationship with food. My whole life I've struggled with having just a toxic relationship with food and with my body, and I'm done with that. I just want to be at peace. So yes, we'll see. Oh, that's interesting. Agatha says that she had a great therapy session today, and her therapist asked her some good questions. He asked, what is her love to herself? Where is it? What do I deserve? And what is my gift? I really like that. Like, how do you show yourself love? Is that what you're saying? How do you show yourself love? What do I deserve? I think that's a very powerful question. I know at least for me, that's something I've struggled with over the years. The word deserve has always kind of felt synonymous with entitlement. And so I've never really felt like I deserved anything. So I never really, I guess I always struggled with that, which was probably part of the reason I had gotten tangled up with so many of the wrong people over the years. But yeah, I think maybe replacing the word deserve with that capable of or worthy of, things that you're worthy of having in your life is a great question. And I love the what is your gift? I'm just curious, did you say painting? What do you think your gift is? What do you guys think in general? What is your gift? See if anybody. Let me scroll down here. Oh, Kwame was saying the notification didn't work either. Yes, I know. I've been thinking about, there's some services out there that will text people. So like when you go live, you can send out, I think you can even do like you can prearrange it. So it automatically just does it whenever, when you need it to. So that might be something I look into. I don't know how much that is. And I don't know if they will text people, how that works if people are overseas. So yeah, James says, yeah, the text thing is really cool. And James says his gift is being goofy. Hooray says that her gift is teaching, that she homeschools. Oh, I like that. Agatha says she asked Dandelion Greens what her gift was, and Dandelion had said that she is wholehearted. I really like that. That's beautiful. Mariposa, that's great. She says, I am like Barbara Walters. I have a knack for getting people to tell me things about themselves they wouldn't They normally wouldn't, just by looking at them. Yes, I feel like I might have that. I don't know if that's a gift, but I feel like I have that too. I have had some really intense conversations in some very strange places with complete strangers. Uh, but I like it though. It's interesting. I guess I enjoy the realness of really figuring, like, just hearing about what's really going on with people. So often in society, we just go around with all of these different pleasantries, and nobody really talks. Nobody feels comfortable saying like what's really going on. And sometimes I think it's easier just to open up to a complete stranger because you're never going to see them again, and uh, you don't care if they judge you. I think it's a lot more difficult to open up to people, people in your everyday life. Karen says tenacity, both a blessing and a curse. Benjamin says his gift is music. He plays the guitar. Beth says her gift is cooking. Merzia says that she paints. Rob says music, music, music. That's so cool. It's good that you guys know these things about yourself. Ileana says, I don't really know. I think it can be really difficult to kind of get a pulse for what our gift is, especially if we're, because we're so close to ourselves, and sometimes it's hard to have that perspective that's needed. When I was probably about a year, maybe 6 months or so into doing the support group and my YouTube channel and such, I had one of the admins in there tell me that I was very compassionate, and that was what he felt drew people to our support group and to the channel. And I had never thought of myself that way before. So it was very interesting. It's so weird how we kind of think of ourselves and how other people see us, how they can be very different. I'm not saying that I didn't think I didn't have compassion, but I would not have, I don't know, I would not have considered that like top 5 or even 10 traits. So weird. Between says intuition. Oh, well, that's interesting. Agatha says, Dana, your gift is clarity. That's really cool. If that is true, then that's really cool. I'll take that. And I think that might go hand in hand with overthinking. Thinking about random things. I was thinking the other night about how this is middle of the night thoughts, how I should just consider either starting a blog or having this totally separate YouTube channel that's just called Middle of the Night Thoughts. Because I just get going on the most random things ever, and my brain just won't shut off. So, and then they truly are incredibly random. So I thought that might be entertaining. Agatha says, you mean all of the random things I send to you? LOL, I'm overthinking everything. Yes, it's along those lines, but sometimes it's just like very far out there. For example, the other night, I was laying in bed wide awake thinking about if you've seen the movie Aliens with those face hugger things, and how they would like plant eggs inside of a person, and those, little chest burster monsters would come out. And I kept thinking, I'm like, well, okay, where are those going? Are they going down like their windpipe, like into their lungs, or are they going into their stomach? And would it survive in your stomach's really acidic? So like, would it survive in that atmosphere or that environment? Or if it was in your lungs and it was growing, I mean, you would really feel that, like you would be short of breath. So maybe it's not that. It's just going, I mean, just not ridiculousness, stuff that does not matter. Yeah, the division hacker says, but they have acid for blood. That I had thought about that, and they spit acid. So like, well, maybe. I don't know. Randomness, 3 a.m., middle of the night thoughts. Let's see here. Yes, right. Rob says science fiction meets the reality of middle of the night thoughts. Yes. Oh, you're right. You're right. I stand corrected. Ileana says they actually bleed acid. You're right. They just are slimy. Like the inside of their mouth is just slimy. I gotta say, you could have a new show, science fiction versus PMLity. Or just taking two, we could have a bucket full of concepts like that, like author names, movie titles, movie concepts, and we could just draw two topics out of a bucket and then see if we can pair them together. Inmag says, thank you for the laughs. I needed this. Oh, geez. Yeah, that might be entertaining to just do something completely random like that. Tiny Girl says, I have had revelations in the middle of the night. Yes. Yes, it's amazing what can come to our mind when our mind is somewhat relaxed. Let's see. Somebody had mentioned, yes, Julie had mentioned the show The OA on Netflix. Yes, we just binged watched season 1 and 2 of that. Season 1 was by far my favorite. Season 2 got a little strange, but it was really interesting concept for a show. So yes, that was good. Let's see. Taurus Girl says, is it normal for me to be depressed? My ex discarded me and instantly went online to try to find other girls to date. It makes me feel worthless, like no one else is going to want me because he didn't. Well, yes, I think it's normal to be depressed and normal to feel completely thrown for a loop by that. It's just so painful when when they move on so quickly. Like nothing. It's just absolutely heartbreaking. But however, I think it's important for you to realize that him not loving you is not a reflection of how lovable you are. It's a reflection of him and his ability to form deep attachments. So if he was able to just quickly pick up and act like nothing happened, that's not you. That's a him thing. So I felt very much the same way. I think that was one of the biggest shocks for me. Well, with both of the two different men in my life, the one, Jack, that was how I found out. That was the initial string on a sweater. Is I happened to come across, I was on Craigslist and came across, it was just such a fluke thing, was clicking around on there. I was in the middle of nowhere fixing up this house and clicking around, and I see that there's some dating profiles on there that looked like some of the wording he would use and some of the pictures, like his style of photography. And I thought, oh, surely not. Like this can't be him. And then I began looking on like Plenty of Fish and other sites, and sure enough, he was all over them. And what was so painful at the time, well, not only that, but I also didn't realize what was going on, but was the profiles that he had written talking about, he really wants to find the one and looking to settle down, and he's a good man and blah, blah, blah. And my jaw was just on the floor. I couldn't believe it. And at the time, because I didn't realize anything about narcissists or sociopaths, and I didn't know the full extent of what had been going on with him and everything else, I totally internalized that. And I felt like, well, what's so wrong with me? Why am I not lovable enough? Am I not thin enough? Am I not attractive enough? Do I not have enough money? Like what's so wrong with me? And yeah, because especially for 2 years, he'd put up this whole front that, we got along famously. And then I realized, oh, wow, this guy doesn't love me. He doesn't even like me. That was really a painful, incredibly painful realization. And not only that, my pet name for him was the screen name that he was using on all these different dating sites. And that was when I realized this guy does not care at all. So, ouch. But no, it's not you. I think it's really important just in general in life, but especially with relationships like this, to really make sure that you're keeping your self-worth and your hurt feelings in two different buckets. So it's okay. It's totally normal and understandable and reasonable to have really hurt feelings about this, but it doesn't need to spill over. We can stop that. It doesn't need to spill over to where it negatively impacts our self-worth. So that can be kind of hard to guard that line, but sometimes it can help to think about it like that. So just because he didn't see your value, just because he didn't bond deeply to you, doesn't mean that you don't have value or that you're not worth bonding to. And if you are fresh out, it can take a little while to just kind of lick your wounds and regroup and to really get back to the place where you're like, you know what? Yeah, I do have a lot to offer. Another profound turning moment for me was when I was going through something very similar. I remember I just was so upset and felt exactly like how you do. And I was going to take a shower. And I remember thinking, like, how come nobody loves me? Like, why am I so lovable? Why have I had all of these problematic people in my life? Like, how come nobody seems to care? And then it was just this realization of, well, I better start loving me. And then the realization was, well, wait, that's weird that I don't love me. There's kind of all these, I think everybody has their own little kind of like where the places in healing where the sun peeks through the clouds and you're like, that's kind of weird. Why is that the case? And so that was definitely one for me. So if you are letting his behavior spill over, and it's not just staying in that hurt feelings bucket, but it's actually spilling over into there's something wrong with you, then this is something that's worth looking at. So it's really important that we realize that you have value, you are lovable, there is a lot that is right about you. And if some person out there doesn't see that's not a reflection of you, that's a reflection of them. Your value, your worth, all of that's still there. And to really triple up on your self-love and realize that it's about loving yourself. I think first and foremost, because here's the other thing too. I was always so confused for years when people talked about that. Oh, you've got to love yourself. You got to love yourself first. Like, what does this even mean? And I think it's important to realize, when when we love ourselves, we treat ourselves with value across the board. And when we treat ourselves with value, we also understand, we have that awareness of when we're being mistreated. And that is so key. This stuff is not taught. So I think there's the vast majority of people walking this planet that don't understand this. Because we're normally kind of culture, we're indoctrinated into thinking, to giving other people the benefit of the doubt, kind of glossing over a lot of their behavior. And when we get tangled up with an emotionally or psychologically or abusive person in any way, shape, or form, that's when at the end of these relationships, that's when we kind of realize, like, how did I get here? How did things get to this point? And it starts further upstream. But again, like I'm saying, the vast majority of people, I really fully, strongly believe, do not understand this. So it's not just a you thing or a me thing, or, it's a people thing. Most people don't realize when they're being mistreated. I really feel like it takes a person going, at least at this stage in kind of mental health awareness, it unfortunately takes us experiencing a tremendous amount of pain for us to start examining these things. So, and especially if a person tends to be more on like the kind of empathetic, compassionate, kind of understanding, people-pleasing side of the spectrum, where it's like, hey, I just, I want peace in my life. And, it's easy to kind of look over a lot of stuff that, we need to not be looking over. So there's a lot there. It truly is a string on a sweater. Okay, let's see. It looks like Servetta, not sure if I'm saying that. Let me look, has a question. That's a good question. She says, hi, Dana, it's always nice to listen to you, and you've helped a lot in the last year. It could be off topic, but could you talk about borderline personality disorder sometime? It would be useful to know some similarities and differences with narcissistic personality disorder, despite being part of the same cluster. Sure, we can talk about borderline personality disorder. I have always been on the fence with this personality disorder because there's a lot of behaviors in there that I really strongly feel, a lot of personalities in general do tend to stem from some sort of trauma. At least that's the thought. But I've seen a lot of, I just have seen a lot of what I feel kind of misinformation or inaccurate information about borderline from, again, just across the board. This is just my, armchair opinion on things. But so borderline personality disorder, it tends to be kind of very black or white thinking, very impulsive, very very rapidly shifting emotions. They can go, a person with borderline personality disorder can go from loving you to hating you in an instant. They're very, I would say, almost kind of like a live wire, where if anything doesn't kind of go according to their plan, they're very reactive. But this is what I'm saying, because there's a lot of overlap with trauma, with especially recent trauma. So it's very common for people that have been out of an abusive relationship. It's very common for people who are in an abusive relationship, if it is not physical abuse, for mental health professionals in general, for that not to be identified. I don't know why this is, but I've seen it numerous times just fly under the radar. So it's very difficult for them to get validation of that what they are experiencing is in fact abuse. And if a person's been in a crazy making relationship or, a flat out abusive relationship for a long time, they're going to be completely dysregulated. So there's a lot of kind of survivor traits, PTSD type traits that are rolled in there. And that's always kind of my concern about that. And, in general, I don't want to add to the stigma of any mental health in general. So I've had quite a few patients when I was a psychiatric nurse, quite a few patients over the years who had borderline personality disorder. And I have to honestly, they were some of my favorites. And I know you shouldn't have favorites, but they tended to be very creative. To me, knowing what I know now, I would have looked back and I would have seen them more in terms of a very wounded person with a lot of trauma, a lot of unhealed trauma, and a lot of kind of more, I would say, what would be considered like codependency issues. So again, this is my 2 cents. I think a lot of mental health professionals, when they talk about borderline personality disorder, it's kind of viewed in a very negative way. It's like, oh, they're very manipulative. They are very reactive. They can be attention seeking. They can be dramatic, these kinds of things. But I think if you can tell the difference if, like I said, I've had the benefit of, I mean, our caseload was 800 patients. So like they were all either personality disordered or mentally ill. So that's all we worked with. And for me, I could see the differences between them, where you would have, and because there is so much overlap, like with narcissistic personality disorder, there's usually just this grandiosity. There's usually, and that kind of comes across as like arrogance, this haughty attitude, kind of this low on empathy, low on remorse, just, if you watch Game of Thrones, it's like Joffrey, like it's just the Joffreys of the world, or just kind of that extreme behavior. But the thing is, though, there's a lot of problematic people tend to have a wide variety of problematic behavior. So to me, the difference is like narcissism, it's more of this really problematic degree of self-absorption. That's not present with borderline personality disorder. And borderline personality disorder, it's, they have empathy, they have remorse. There is this sincere connection to other people. They, if they are more on like the manipulative side, they can be entitled, but it's, I guess when I think of borderline personality, it's more of just the reactivity. Somebody had described it the other day. It was so perfect. They said the borderline is the line between neurotic and psychotic. So I thought that was a really good way to say it. So the psychotic part is basically you're just not in reality. So it tends to, and you can see this a lot too with a lot of narcissists. Like there's kind of this almost delusional component to a lot of their behavior. The neurotic part is more of just this kind of extreme behavior. There tends to be a lot of like anxiousness surrounding anything. It's certain behaviors done to an extreme extent. But at the end of the day, I think for our purposes, I don't know. I have a lot of feelings about mental health diagnoses for kind of a wide variety of reasons. But here's the thing. When people are learning about all of this, it's very easy to be like, oh my gosh, that describes me. And borderline personality disorder is definitely one of those for a lot of survivors. And there can be this level of kind of like identity foreclosure of, oh no, I'm profoundly broken. It was my fault. I have a personality disorder. I ruined everything, right? And personality disorders, it's a cluster of different behaviors that make those up. And so I don't know, I guess the point is, if you're concerned, you're like, boy, you know what? I feel like I have a lot of these different behaviors within myself. If you're motivated to look inward and to work on those, then by all means, go for it. I just don't like the limitations that sometimes it's the unintended consequence of certain labels like that. So, but I think, again, for our purposes, it's less about if we're sitting here trying to figure out, if we have an abusive person in our life and we're trying to figure out, well, do they have narcissistic personality disorder, or do they have borderline personality disorder, or what's going on with them? And if our thinking is, well, if they have borderline personality disorder, then they can go to therapy and then they can get better and then this relationship can work. If that's our line of thinking, then that's concerning. So I think it's more important that we examine, to really get in tune with where our boundaries, standards, and deal breakers are for anybody in our life. Because there's people out there that wouldn't have any type of diagnosis that are incredibly problematic. And then there's people out there that have numerous, that are, have schizophrenia, and they have, general anxiety disorder, and they have diabetes, and they have all kinds of issues going on, and they are profoundly more functional than a person with no mental health diagnoses. It just depends on the person. So Salon says, Dana, do you think borderline personality disordered people can be energy draining? Kind of like when my mom is heavily anxious and fearful, not blaming, by the way, but just trying to be introspective. I think if we back that up even a little bit further, what can be so draining about kind of the different personality styles in that cluster is, they tend to be dramatic, erratic, and emotional. And it all kind of goes part and parcel with, I'm hesitant to say this because, like I said, the borderline, there's so much of, I think there's so much overlap there with PTSD, but let's just talk about behaviors. There tends to be a lot of kind of emotional immaturity within that cluster. And I don't mean that in a judgmental way. I just mean that in like an observational way. So, and again, a lot of this stuff is normal. If a person's been traumatized, they're going to be reactive. I was a complete live wire after my situation, and it was embarrassing. And I just had very little control over myself. So I get it. But yeah, that tends to be the attention seeking, the, manipulation, and I'm not even just talking about borderline personality disorder, just in general. These are the behaviors that tend to just exhaust people. It's the kind of PMLity would say, like, the inability to share their reality moderately. So it's just kind of too much. It can kind of feel more like, well, I guess I just would say sometimes it just kind of feels more, you're just dealing with a lot of kind of, lying and manipulating and entitlement. And then there's no real sense of appropriate boundaries. So it's kind of within that whole cluster, like you're just continually trying to work. You're trying to kind of having to reinforce it sounds so terrible, but like the basics of adult behavior, and continually being like, okay, that outfit's not appropriate. That's way too sexy to go to a PTA meeting, or not that I would even say that, but it's this kind of stuff where you're like, okay, there's just some things that they're not getting, antisocial personality disorder, having to continually, they're incredibly manipulative. So it's like you're having to explain why cheating is bad, why lying is bad, why flirting is bad, why this is not okay. There's just a completely different mindset there. And of course, they know, they just don't care. But it's chasing after another person, having to try to get them to that socially expected level of appropriate behavior. It's very energy draining. The book that we just read for book club, I think, summed it up so perfectly. It was The Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents. Fantastic. All of the behaviors that they described in there, again, taking away labels of personality disorder, but just looking at the behaviors of this is emotional immaturity. You're like, yep, that's why that's so exhausting and so draining. So if you haven't read that book, I highly recommend it because it was just so spot on. Okay, okay, Phoenix says, wait, Dana, when you said having to explain, oh, like the expected social behavior. So, is that a part of antisocial personality disorder? Antisocial personality disorder, people that have that, there's a lack of regard across the board for other people. There's a lack of regard for laws, for social constructs, for the rights of others. There's a lack of empathy. There's a lack of remorse, extreme manipulation. They're very exploitative. Narcissists, again, like when you've lived it versus kind of what's in the DSM, there's kind of this disconnect there. But narcissists, at least in like the DSM, it's more of just this blinding degree of self-absorption. They're not really, they can be manipulative, but it's not to the level, it's not flat out exploitative. It's not, dangerous, deadly kind of behavior, cold, cruel, calculating, just extreme stuff. That's on the antisocial end of things. So if you think about behavior in kind of two ways, this can help. Like, we either handle things in a pro-social way or an antisocial way. So for example, you don't like your spouse, right? You would divorce them, or you go to therapy, or you start staying real, you stay busy at the office, you're doing something, but that's within the bounds of pro-social behavior. Antisocial behavior would be like Chris Watts, and you just kill your whole family. Like that kind of stuff is just kind of a complete lack of regard for other people, for their individuality, their autonomy, their life. And that's extreme. But the fact that that would even enter into somebody's mind is a problem. So, yeah. Okay, let me see. Oh, Tara's saying that she's reading the book and it's so good. Yes, I agree. And, it's one of those things too, like with behavior, is it's not so black and white. It's not, and especially with narcissism. Narcissism is a personality trait. We all have it. And that's not a bad thing. It's to the degree of which we have it that it can become a problem. So there's a concept out there called healthy narcissism, and that's the ability of setting goals, getting out of bed in the morning, being like, hey, why not me? Why not today? You believe that you have value. You believe that you matter. You believe that you have value. You believe that you matter. Further down that spectrum is when it becomes, so I guess you could say like healthy narcissism is basically having a healthy sense of self. Then it becomes further down the spectrum, then it becomes like self-absorption. And then it become kind of at the expense of others. You have narcissistic parents who are just completely uninvolved with their children, or their spouse. They just don't care. It's just all about them all of the time. Then it gets further down. It's kind of me at the expense of you. So it's that degree of narcissism where or I should say me at the destruction of another person. And then that's where you get a lot of that abusive behavior that comes in. Let me see. Scroll. Okay. So people are talking about introverts and antisocial. So there's a difference between being asocial and antisocial. So antisocial is kind of anti-society. It's anti-laws, rules, norms, respect and dignity for other people, basically. Asocial is when you're just not very social. You're more of the introvert. So this can be very confusing because a lot of people are like, well, I don't know if I heard somewhere that my therapist said that my girlfriend or boyfriend had antisocial personality disorder, or that they thought they did. But I don't think so. They're very charming. They're very outgoing. They can't possibly have antisocial personality disorder, but that has nothing to do with it. So introversion, extroversion has nothing to do with antisocial behavior. It's the impact of their behavior. It's not the level of, desire to interact with others. Okay, let's. Okay, Taurus girl says, yeah, I thought I was antisocial because it meant wanting to keep away from others. Like they say, if they were invited to a party and they turned it down or kept in a corner, which is me because I'm shy. Well, so no, they're two very different things, but that's one of those terms. People commonly will say that, oh, you're being antisocial. And so kind of in everyday life, people commonly use that word antisocial to mean introverted, to mean that you're not interested in being social. But for diagnosis, like DSM purposes, it's very different. But yes, that can be very confusing. And this was so hard when the kind of, these labels can give clarity, but they can also give way to a lot of confusion. Because then the next step for a person with some of the stuff, they're like, oh, well, I heard that this person has they're antisocial, they're really exploitative, they've got this longstanding, history, they've all this stuff going on. I heard from, somebody diagnosed them with antisocial personality disorder, but I don't like to go to parties and I don't like to be around people. So I'm antisocial too. So I must be like them. And that's an incorrect connection that I think is frequently made, but it's not the same thing. But anyways, what I was going to say before, if you kind of break all of these different personality disorders down into behaviors, it can make things a lot more clear. So that book that we just finished reading, The Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents, was fantastic because it really broke down what emotionally immature behavior is. And because none of us are at the finish line. So life is a whole journey, and hopefully we're continually looking inward and kind of being self-reflective. And so, you see this book, like I said, just did a fantastic job of this. You can see, I think most people that read it, you'll see a handful of those behaviors within yourself. I think it would be difficult for somebody to not, because again, this stuff's not taught, and it's not something that you would just naturally develop, even if you lived in the healthiest home in the world. So that book is very good for self-reflection. And then you can see stuff in other people too. And then you have the terminology where you're like, oh, bingo, that's why that's so draining to me. That's why. Normally, like when we're around another person and we just feel so drained by them, it's usually because they're either acting in a way that's completely illogical or irrational. So they're doing things that either don't lead to a sense of calm or they don't lead to a solution. So they're creating drama for the sake of drama. They're lying, and they're manipulating, and they're just constantly stirring the pot, and they're kind of pitting people against each other. And then you've got conversations that just never get resolved, and that go nowhere. And you feel like they're baiting you into arguments, or they're being snarky, or they're trying to push your buttons, or they are pushing your buttons, or it takes a lot of energy to kind of hold the line with people like that. If you've ever, had a neighbor like that, or somebody at work where you couldn't get away from, we've all, I think, all been in relationships with people like that, but if you live next to them, breaking up isn't going to fix it. Like, they're just there. It's just absolutely draining. You see this kind of a coworker or neighbor coming, and you just think, oh, great, not again. Like, I got to go quickly find something to do, because it's always something with this person, and it's just draining, because it's nonsense. It's just a bunch of nonsense. Yeah. And Rob was saying the energy drain is the worst part of these forms of abuse. Energy draining posing as apparently normal behavior. Yeah. And a lot of, again, this stuff's not taught. And so as we're learning more about it, you just start to become a lot more aware of it. But it's really cool when you start having the terminology for it. You're like, oh, that's triangulation. That's projection. Okay, this is where, if I really need to do a whole series of videos on different logical fallacies, because that is how and why these conversations, especially with narcissists, get so off track, because they're not logical conversations. They'll create straw man arguments. They will have all these different like non sequiturs. And if you Google logical fallacies, you can see some of them, and why, when they're broken down, like why that, why it's not logical, why this doesn't follow that kind of a thing, and how these conversations just don't get resolved. It's so difficult to see this stuff when you're in the middle of it. But it's a lot easier when you can read about it and have that emotional distance. Yep. Ad hominem. That's a good one. Up yours had recommended. Let's see. Let me scroll up here. Kay Kobe says, I need to get healthy narcissism. More of echo is my problem. Yeah, I think that is one of the big turning points in healing for all of us, is realizing kind of where that healthy balance is. Because I think for so many of us, for so long, the challenge has been that a lot of our personality traits, we never thought that they were a problem, because they are normally seen as good traits. Oh, you're very caring, you're very compassionate, very go with the flow, very understanding, right? You're a peacekeeper, these kinds of things. You're very, like these are all kind of oftentimes euphemisms for kind of poor boundaries. And trying to tell a person who has these kind of behavior, these traits within them, that they get very defensive, understandably so, especially if they've been the target of abuse. So please don't get me wrong. I'm by no means saying that, like that any of us deserved what happened to us, because we didn't. And, I think the big wake up call from these relationships is realizing that there is that balance, that kind of that making yourself a priority, realizing that you do matter, realizing when you are being mistreated, uh, realizing that being treated with dignity and respect is not something that's a nice to have. It's a completely reasonable request and the foundation of adult behavior. It's completely reasonable. To just realize that you have power and control over yourself and over your life. Like there's just so many amazing things that we can gain from this that can really radically change our lives for the better as we move forward into this next chapter. But yeah, the healthy narcissism is a big thing, and so many survivors really struggle with this. I get it. I completely relate to this. It's difficult when you've spent your whole life kind of putting everybody else first and yourself last. The idea of making yourself a priority or even on equal footing with other people can feel very uncomfortable. And this is one of the reasons too that people tend to get involved in several relationships with different types of problematic people, because if this is how we've always been, especially if we've been this way since childhood, where we're just more comfortable putting other people first, well, then I think the kind of unintended result of that can be that we're not comfortable even being in a relationship or a friendship with somebody else if it's equal. So we kind of feel like, well, I need to I'll put them more first and I'll put myself last. And so what that tends to look like is if they say something that hurts our feelings, if they step over a boundary, we don't say anything. We don't assert ourselves. If they need anything, well, we're quick to offer to volunteer, even if we don't have the time or the energy or the money. We are quick to help out. We're always there. You need anything day or night, I'll be here, kind of a thing. Many of us have our whole adult life, our whole working life, have worked in caring kind of caregiver type professions. We were just, because we're good at it. We're drawn to that. But in relationships, it can be very difficult. So it can feel, we say, we're like, yes, I really want this relationship of equality to be treated with dignity and respect. But the vast majority of time when we meet people like that, it feels really uncomfortable. And it kind of feels like, well, the uneasiness that can follow from that, it can be like, well, because I'm not giving and giving and giving and giving, because you don't need that or you don't want that. If I can't give and give and give, then it feels like, well, then I'm not really earning my keep around here. And if I'm not really earning my keep in this relationship, then what's to prevent you from leaving? That's a big aha for a lot of people. So it's not that men or women tend to be attracted to like the bad boy or the bad girl. It's that dynamic of I'm more comfortable putting other people first than myself last because I know this dance. And that's why. So it's not it's not the tattoos or the leather jacket or any of that stuff that's the problem. It's that dynamic, that unequal dynamic, that's the problem. But we have to really turn inward and start practicing getting comfortable having these relationships of equality, because it doesn't feel comfortable at first. If anything, it can turn us ice cold. So something to think about. Okay, let me. a lot, I see a lot of people in the support, this is such a common question. People in the support group will say, well, wouldn't it be so great if two survivors, if we could just date, right? Two empaths could come together, how wonderful that would be. But for all the reasons I was just saying, the vast majority of the time, it's just not a comfortable dynamic until we can figure it out. So somebody had asked earlier and I stopped on the question and then I lost it. Okay, Kiara, I'm going to copy and paste this question because it's fantastic. Somebody had asked about protecting energy, kind of being more on the empathic side of the spectrum. Here we go. Oh, it's also from Kiara. Kiara says, hey, Dana, what are some tips for empaths to preserve their energy and protect themselves? I tend to feel other people's angry, awkward energy, especially when setting boundaries, and I often feel swept away. Okay, so I think a lot of this, it's practice. So when we're absorbing other people's energy and other people's emotions, that's a sign that our boundaries need some work. And this can be very difficult. It's still something that I really struggle with. But as far as anger goes, examining what is it that is so concerning to you? Because generally that kind of stuff, if we fear anger, it tends to be because it's kind of hitting the chord of some unresolved abandonment issues we have. That's just something that I've noticed with other people and then also within myself. So if we're afraid to assert ourselves, if we're afraid to say, hey, you know what, that hurt my feelings, or I don't like being talked to like that, if we're not comfortable rocking the boat, it might feel like, well, I just don't like anger. And that's part of it, but it tends to go a little bit deeper. It tends to be like, well, I don't like anger because I'm afraid that they're going to leave or they're going to kick me out, that this is going to end. And if that's the case, then that's really worth kind of reflecting on, because like I said, that does tend to be some kind of unaddressed abandonment stuff. But anger, sometimes it can help too, I think, to kind of play it out. Because, again, I think for a lot of us, when we experience somebody else's anger, we immediately go into freeze mode and we just don't know how to react. And sometimes we're not even aware that we're in freeze mode, and we can stay in that freeze mode for quite a while. But if we can think about, okay, well, what is worst case scenario? Like, what am I so afraid of? If they get angry, then what? Am I afraid that they're going to actually like yell at me or physically attack me or leave or what? Like what? So I think kind of putting a face on that monster, getting really clear about like, what is this that's concerning you? A lot of us too, I think, are just uncomfortable with anger because for whatever we either grew up this way or this tends to be kind of more of our personality, but we're so used to putting other people first, walking on eggshells, being people pleasing, being, kind of quote unquote, go with the flow. We don't know how to handle anger. We don't know how to handle confrontation. So we're not comfortable with confrontation or conflict because we don't know how to handle it. And we're not comfortable with somebody else's anger because we don't know what to do with it. Because if all of the tools that we have in our toolbox is niceness, basically, then that niceness only goes so far in handling confrontation. So when a lot of us, when we do experience another person's anger, if that's us, then what we tend to fall back to is this really kind of ingratiating behavior. The angrier they get, then the more niceness we add to it. The more kind of placating and people pleasing and accommodating and soothing and ingratiating we become. And again, that's a problem because the only thing that's resolved is now they might not be so mad, but nothing has actually been resolved. We just have diffused that moment with our niceness, but conflict is going to come up. If two people are being authentic, conflict is going to come up, and conflict isn't a bad thing. It's how we handle it that can be a problem. So if we can learn some like assertiveness skills, if we can just get comfortable, this takes practice. Again, it's something I still really struggle with. Getting comfortable. I think knowing when you're around emotionally safe people is huge. And the way that you know that is through having conflict that you work through, or having confrontations that you're able to work through. And you realize when you bring something up or they bring something up, and then you both realize, hey, you know what? I really value you, and we're both very solutions oriented. I want to keep this friendship or this relationship going. Let's talk about this. And I'm going to treat you with dignity and respect, and you're going to treat me that way. And we know this about each other because this has been our behavior. When that is established, it's so much easier for a person. It can still be difficult for us, but it's a lot easier for us to come forward and to voice our concerns, knowing that our concerns are going to be taken seriously and handled appropriately. But like I said, this stuff takes practice, and it definitely takes practice with emotionally safe people that have proven themselves by their behavior over a consistent period of time to be emotionally safe. And then I guess, and also to the awkward energy, I think just realizing, other people are going to have emotions. I don't need to fix that. And I don't need to change that. And they have every right to feel how they feel, just like we have every right to feel how we feel. The difference is how we express that. So a person has every right to be angry or to be frustrated or what have you, but they don't have the right to then become abusive. And then the second part of your question, let me copy it because had to do with that. How do we deal with other people's anger when setting boundaries? Other people's anger is the thing that makes me fear the most, because it oftentimes leads to further abuse and is in a risk in and of itself. Okay, so this goes back to being around emotionally safe people. If somebody has proven themselves to be verbally, emotionally unsafe, they're verbally, emotionally, physically abusive, or abusive in any other way, setting boundaries with them is really not going to work. So it's going to be kind of screaming into the wind, because you're right, for all of the reasons you just mentioned, it tends to escalate. Because for those kinds of people, again, if we think about this in terms of emotional immaturity, emotionally immature people, there's no boundaries. And if there are boundaries, they're either incredibly blurred or they're very enmeshed. But there is no sense of healthy boundaries. And so if you were to try to establish healthy boundaries with a person like that, they don't understand. And they think they will interpret that as you either being difficult or you being defiant or something. It's just not on their radar of ways to handle things. Same thing with being assertive. We would all think like, well, this makes so much sense. If you have an issue, you let another person know in a very kind of tactful and non-aggressive way, that a very solutions-oriented way, right? Like, here's my issue. I'm being honest. Let's talk about this. That's what resolves things. But being assertive requires also being vulnerable. And again, this stuff is not taught. So most people are not comfortable being that direct because we don't know how the other person's going to handle it. They might shoot us down. They might make fun of us. They might want to start a fight. So what people tend to default to is then they become either passive aggressive or passive aggressive. assertive isn't anybody's default. I think that really truly is something that it's a skill we have to develop. Liz says, why are so many people disordered? There are so many YouTube channels on narcissism in the past few years. What started this awareness? I feel like they're everywhere. Yeah, it's hard to say if, like, kind of what brought that about. I've noticed that too. And I guess it's one of those things too, like, you know, have these channels just always kind of been there, or what? Is it just we're noticing it more because it's on our radar, because it's significant to us, because we've lived it? Or is there some kind of big trend going on? I think there has been a lot more kind of media attention and awareness to all of this. And I'm, politically, this is not a slam, but there has been a lot of terminology that's come up in the media regarding Donald Trump about, gaslighting and, narcissism and these kinds of things. So I think on a more global level, regardless of whether he is or isn't, just the conversation has been started. So I think that's part of it. I think people are starting to realize that they can search different things on the internet. I know for me, it didn't ever dawn on me to look up this kind of stuff on the internet. But I think because there is more information out there, people tend to look up kind of peripheral type things. Like they might look up, how to tell if my partner's cheating, or how to tell if this time somebody's changed, or bizarre behavior, or what is manipulative behavior. And before, they might not have gotten very much, but now there's a lot more that's out there. So then they kind of stumble in here. That's been my experience. Let's see here. Truth Seeker says assertiveness is becoming more possible early on in getting to know people and with no contact from problematic people from the past. All of this stuff is so interconnected, which can be a little overwhelming, but it can also be very positive. Because if you gain any ground in one area, it spills over into other areas. So, for example, if you start really realizing, really embracing, like, hey, you know what? I matter. I matter just as much as anybody else. Like I have value. I'm here. I have value. That piece of the puzzle then kind of spills over into it raises your standards. And then when your standards raise, it changes your deal breakers. And then also with your standards raising, you don't even have to think about it. Like your boundaries then change. They become kind of tightened up. So there's just all of this overlap. And then once your boundaries start getting in alignment, your boundaries start guarding basically your deal breakers and your standards to make sure that those things happen, then assertiveness tends to follow. So I know all of these skills, it can be very, like I said, very overwhelming to think, oh boy, I've got to learn all these different things. But sometimes it's just a few shifts in thinking that can really radically transform your life. So for example, once you realize, hey, yeah, dignity and respect is not too much to ask. Like that's how we're all expected to behave, right? It's just the basics of adult behavior. Being aware of knowing when you're actually mistreated, and then realizing that there's just no excuse for it. I think a lot of it just having that clarity of that, because as a society, we tend to gloss over this. Oh, well, they they were really stressed out and that's why they yelled, or you came home, I don't know, from your meeting late and they didn't have dinner yet because they were waiting on you. And that's why they yelled or hit you or what have you. But once you realize, you know what, there's no excuse for abuse. A person can feel however they feel. They can feel angry and frustrated and upset and all of these things, but I expect dignity and respect. So they can feel how they want to feel, but that doesn't mean that they can treat me any way that they see fit. So there is no excuse for abuse. You can be upset with me all you want, but I still expect you to not yell at me, to not call me names, to not cuss me out, to not become intimidating, to not hit, to not spit, to not kick, to not threaten, to not do any of that. And then once you kind of realize, oh, this isn't asking too much, then it becomes a lot easier when you do encounter, especially new people in your life that start behaving like that. It becomes very easy to realize, you know what, there's nothing here for me. It doesn't matter. Sometimes it's really unfortunate. You're like, man, that person, they had so many things I really liked about them, but that's deal breaker stuff. Like this emotional immaturity, this inability to have adult behavior. I can't do anything with this. Like this stuff is so extreme that if they don't have that kind of stuff figured out by like first grade, there's a really big problem. And us trying to continually set boundaries with them is not going to fix it. If anything, it's going to make it a lot worse because they've been like this their whole life and they've found other people their whole life that have danced their dance with putting up with that kind of stuff. So, but it becomes very easy. Like I said, once you get your standards and your self-esteem and your self-worth to a certain level, all of this stuff kind of shakes out and you don't have to spend all this time analyzing like, well, is this a red flag? Is that a red flag? Well, what does this mean? And all of that, you just boil it down to, when you're being mistreated and you know how to handle that if and when it happens. You can either be assertive and address it, or if it's egregious behavior, it can be a deal breaker and you're gone. Let's see here. Let me see here. Oh, back to the question too about like why are there so many people out there that are disordered? I think if we even back that question up a few more steps to emotionally immature, how is it that there's all these people out running amok? Like where, like the lack of empathy, the lack of remorse, the blinding degree of self-absorption, the lying, the manipulating, all of this kind of stuff. I think there's a lot of different factors at play. And I think a lot of it just boils down to this stuff's not taught. So people are, they're having to fumble and figure it out as they go. And then people have children and they don't have a healthy, this is the way Pia Melody describes it. I just love her explanation the best. She refers to it as nurturing. Like if we don't come from a nurturing environment, then this, no one's going to know this stuff. And I really like that because it's not about having a good family. It's not about having, Norman Rockwell childhood. It's about whether or not the family was nurturing. And I would say the vast majority of families are not, because this stuff's not on the radar for most people. So in my opinion, nurturing it's in part the kind of the base. I think a quote unquote good family, healthy, I'll say healthy family home has some of the basics. You're treated with dignity and respect. There's an understanding, there's an appreciation and understanding of autonomy and individuality. And I'm not trying to get you to be me and vice versa. And I understand that you are your own person with your wants and needs and goals and thoughts and feelings and opinions, and you're going to go do you, and you should, because you are you, right? So I think healthy family structures have that. They understand how to work as a team, but then they also understand the individuality of each person there. But with a lot of this stuff, with understanding, I would say the kind of more of the advanced understandings of boundaries, with going slow, like learning how to appropriately trust other people is something that's really not taught. Learning to tuning inward to know when you're being mistreated, and how to actually take self-protective action when that happens. That's not taught. I read an article a while back about a mother, and this is how this stuff is so insidious, like it just flies under the radar. There was a mother, her daughter, I don't know, was in kindergarten or first grade or something, and there was another child she didn't like. And I think the girl was even kind of a bully. And so she was telling her mom, I don't like Susie. She's, she's not nice to me, and she does X, Y, and Z. And so her mom, of course, thinking that she's doing the right thing, is like, well, you need to be friendly to everybody. And I really think that basically forced her to be friends with this other little girl. You need to invite her over for your birthday party. You need to do all these things. You guys need to be friends. Love conquers all, right? And I know that the mother, I would imagine, I don't know for sure, but I would imagine that the mother's coming from a good place. And that was her thinking, that, you've got to be the bigger person. Love conquers all. You just, got to walk the high road kind of thing. The downside of this kind of stuff is that especially to a small child, it teaches them that if you are uncomfortable around somebody, or if somebody is mistreating you, then that's your problem. And that you need to work overtime to befriend them and to, somehow make things work. That's a problem. So there's so many of these little tiny things that I think a lot of us do unintentionally that contribute to this. Because, I think especially to people that are, I would say, probably 35 and older, it was, I think very much expected, especially when you were children, of, you were more kind of seen and not heard. And, if I remember, there are many times where there were different relatives that I wasn't comfortable being around for whatever reason. And it was, you get pushed on them. Like, you need to go, give, your great Aunt Myrtle, who's 104, go give her a kiss. And, when you're 5 years old, that's a person that's really old, is really scary, but stuff like that. But then you feel bad. Then you learn, like, oh, not being comfortable around certain people is bad. Instead of learning how to navigate, instead of like actually owning, like, okay, I'm just uncomfortable with this for whatever reason, I need to figure out how to actually handle that, or just being allowed to be uncomfortable and not handle it. Yes, I agree. Salon says, yeah, no one should force you to be friends with someone who's being mean to you at any age, 0 to 120. Yes. Yeah, and that's another good point. And Salon says, I felt so nervous greeting people in big gatherings. This is, again, how so many of us get all twisted up in this, because it might be from well-intended people that are like, oh, you're really shy. We need to break you of that. So you need to get out on stage. You need to go do this. And that can really backfire and can be very traumatizing. Like, I think it's just important that we understand, like, we're all different and our different ways. And then that's okay. Jack says, hey, Dana, Julie asks, I need to find some ways to build my self-confidence. Do you have any ideas? Well, I think self-confidence tends to be built when we are able to achieve something. So setting small goals and then achieving them. And it's that sense of completion of, yes, I can do that. So whatever that might look like. So for example, I was sharing earlier, I'd been very overwhelmed for a very long time with trying to learn video editing software. And I had really developed this attitude of like learned helplessness. Like, doesn't matter what I do, I'm not going to be able to figure it out. Like I had zero self-confidence in my abilities to figure it out. And what helped me, and this is years, like at least 3 years now that I've tried and failed and just was so frustrated and embarrassed and all kinds of things. So what I decided to do this morning was to set a timer for 30 minutes. And I don't need to have it all figured out, but to see what I can learn in 30 minutes. And that was really helpful because I was able to pick up a few things. I learned a few new things, but it was in those learning a few new things that changed my kind of my references, my understanding of what I was actually capable of. So I think that kind of stuff is to any level. So if you're struggling with self-confidence in, I don't know, taking a class or going back to school or interacting with other people, these kinds of things, doing it in bite-sized pieces and then just proving to yourself, oh, I can do that. So if you're very overwhelmed, for example, with, you just really lack confidence when you're around a group of people, you could go on meetup.com, go look for some meetups in your area, go to a few and tell yourself, okay, you know what? The goal here is to introduce myself to 2 people. And that's it. I don't need to get phone numbers. We don't need to be best friends. The goal is to get a little bit out of my comfort zone. And then next time to get a little bit more out of my comfort zone and so on. And so each time you achieve these little bite-sized goals, that's how you build up that self-confidence. So does that help? Okay, let's see. Scrolling. Liz, says, I went off social media due to it's a narcissist candy store. Yes, it definitely can be. So I tell you, the internet has just become a very strange place. It's kind of interesting in a people watching kind of place because it's a tool like anything else. And it makes, in any tool, whatever that might be, tends to make us more of what we already are. And so if a person's already got some kind of like unresolved stuff, it tends to be taken to a whole nother level. So if they're really insecure, it's, nonstop, I don't know, like nonstop selfies, it's nonstop kind of attention seeking kind of stuff. Or if they are unhappy, this is one thing I've noticed with some people, if they're really not in a good marriage, they'll go to great lengths on Facebook to talk about how wonderful their significant other is and how happy they are and this, that, and the other. And it's just so interesting to just sit back and kind of watch all this. And then of course you start thinking like, well, you become self-reflective. Like, well, what does this mean? Like, what does this mean for me? Does this, I don't, yikes. Okay, let's see, Kiara. Says Dana, there was someone who hurt me in my past, and I will likely see them in public because we have similar circles. Also, they've been trying to reach out. How do I not default into being nice to them? I guess what is the end goal that you're going for? Because in your situation, if you guys kind of run in the same circles, you're gonna continue to see them. And I think you don't necessarily have to be nice to them, but because of that dynamic, and I guess it depends too, like on what they did, like what kind of hurt, not that you need to go into specifics, but if it was egregious behavior, right? Like they, if it was really crossing a line, then I would have the friends that are truly your friends just say like, you know what, I just can't be around that person. Like, this is what they did, and I don't need that in my life. I'm just done. So that's one way you could go about it. If they hurt you in, let me scroll up here and see if there's any more clarity. If they hurt you in a more of like a hurt feelings kind of way, so it's still not okay, but you're like, okay, this person's just, they are who they are. They're just drama. They're difficult, but they're not dangerous, I guess is the line. Being kind of being pleasant, being polite, being professional. So just kind of keeping it at that level. You're not giving out any personal information. I would just say to try to avoid them as much as you can, to not sit next to them, if you have a friend that's in these same circles, kind of give them a heads up of, oh, you know what, I don't know, Susan's going to be there, and you know how things are between us. If you could just help run some interference, that can sometimes help. So just kind of steering clear of them. You can also practice. That's a big thing. So if there's kind of this common exchange between the two of you, emotionally prepare yourself ahead of time as much as you can. There's a great technique called the empty chair technique. So you can physically rehearse this. If this person says something, what would your response be? And so kind of coming up with some responses ahead of time. It's a lot easier because when we see people like this in real life and we haven't anticipated some different responses, then we're always knocked off balance because of who they are and our history with them. Okay, Kiara says, yeah, they emotionally manipulated me and they stood me up. We were close. They weren't dangerous. I didn't get to set my boundaries, and I think they think we are still friends. But when I tried to set boundaries, they ghosted me. Yeah. So I would just, so then, right? You tried to set boundaries, you tried to be assertive, that didn't work. So it's still probably not going to work. So now it's going to be more of like a distance thing of just trying to hang out with this person less. I would keep the conversation at the level of the conversation you would have with a coworker in an elevator, like at that level. So no personal information, no, pleasant, polite, small talk, and that's it. So, let's see. Zachary makes a very valid comment. He says, do you guys ever feel like sometimes substance use disorders look like narcissistic personality disorder? Yes, absolutely. But that's, kind of the nature of addiction is a person, they're so driven by obtaining that substance, and it rules. So like, I guess here's how I would look at it. Like with people with substance use disorders, they are driven to feed that substance. And generally that substance is there as a way to kind of soothe over some other unhealed wound. With narcissists, they're driven to get their ego fed. So there's still, both of them have this monkey on their back. And it's just a different monkey, I guess you could say. But it's a lot of the same behaviors, kind of for a lot of the same reasons. So you have a lot of that manipulative behavior, that controlling behavior. Substance use, it makes a person, very self-absorbed because they've got to get that monkey fed. So it's all about them. They do things that they wouldn't normally do. They steal, they lie, they manipulate, they, they become very, they can become very difficult, very aggressive, just not a person that we might know. So this is one of the reasons when mental health professionals are looking at trying to figure out, okay, well, what's going on with this person? It's next to impossible to really get an accurate understanding when you've got somebody that is struggling with a substance use disorder, because you don't know if what you're seeing, if this is personality stuff or even mental illness, or if it's drug or alcohol use. So really, in order for anybody to really see what's going on, that person's going to need a solid amount of clean time. I would say, a good 18 months minimum to really see, okay, who is this person without the substances? But this also goes back to us figuring out, okay, well, where are our deal breakers with this stuff? So if a person's, physically abusive and they're stealing from me and they're verbally abusive and they're doing all this stuff, for us, the outcome is still the same. You're still being stolen from and physically attacked and this, that, and the other. It really doesn't matter if a person has a drug addiction or if they have a personality disorder or there's some sort of untreated mental illness or they have a brain injury or you name it. We still have to take the same protective action. So the only difference that it might be on our end is how we might feel about it. So with a person, I don't know, let's say with Alzheimer's or some sort of, cognitive issue or traumatic brain injury or even substance use, and we've known them before and we're like, this is not my brother, this is not the person I love. We might have more compassion and understanding, but we still have to keep ourselves safe. So it's just really getting that drilled into us that we can't sink ourselves to save somebody else. So there's just healthy boundaries at all times. That's the only way that any of this works. Yeah. And Liz says, AA is loaded with narcissists, and I swear they trade alcohol for sex addiction. My ex has dated half the women and moves around to different meetings to meet new women. Yeah. Well, and here's the thing with addiction in general is it's there for a reason. I guess if you can think about it that way, every single thing that we do is to meet some need or to cope with some need not being met. And so, for example, if you watch like My 600-Pound Life or The Hoarders or any of these different shows on TV, and you hear the backstories of these people, pretty much 10 out of 10 times, there's some sort of trauma that happened. They had a parent who left them, a parent who died. They got bullied. They were raped. They went through a horrible divorce. They had a child who died. They had, you name it. And this was kind of their way of coping. And that's what's so scary about coping in problematic ways is we generally don't decide. It's like our brain just kind of decides for us. So, and again, like you hear these stories of people like hoarders or my 600-pound life, a lot of them are so embarrassed. They're like, I don't know how it got this way. This is not me. I didn't realize that I was gaining all this weight and now I'm 600 pounds and I can't move. And, how did I get here? And they're just so overwhelmed and by this. I think that's kind of the standard for addiction. When people really get to that place where they're like, wow, my life is really in a ditch. Hopefully it can be a huge wake-up call. But then the challenge is, and this is one of the issues I have with AA, is there's a couple, but one of which is this whole concept of, alcoholism is a disease. And addiction in general, there's brain changes. It follows a disease-like process. But you know what? So do a lot of things. Addictions to anything follow that. So the problem with that, it's a disease, is, and I think this is the unintended consequence of this, is that it makes it, it kind of helps a person to shirk responsibility and be like, well, it's not me, it's my disease. And because if they're thinking, well, alcoholism is a disease, and they're not connecting it to, there's, the vast majority of the time, there's something there deeper that kicked off this level of alcohol consumption. If they're not addressing that underlying issue, that's going to come out again in some other way. It might come out with sex addiction, or, they say addictions tend to run in threes. And that's very true. And my guess is that tends to be the case because we all kind of need a variety of ways to cope. If you're at work, you can't maybe drink, but maybe you can go smoke. And if you can't smoke, then maybe, you're hooking up with your coworker in the bathroom, or you're playing, you're online gambling during lunch, or you're doing something compulsively. So, or there's eating disorders, or all this stuff kind of just comes out in these, these skewed ways. And so I guess that's my concern, is that because I've seen this, I have, alcoholism in my family. And again, when I was a psychiatric nurse, and that was my biggest concern, of that the underlying issues aren't addressed. And then that's when it leads to, then you've got people that are what's known as a dry drunk. They've stopped drinking, but a lot of the underlying issues, a lot of the behaviors are still there. And it's, I don't know, there's so, I think as a society, we're just at the forefront of putting all of this together as far as mental health and addiction and trauma and all of this. So, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying I have it all figured out. Lord knows I don't, but it'll be interesting to see how all of this takes shape over like the next 10 years. Yeah. Oh, I believe it. Crystal says, yeah, my ex's Sex Addicts Anonymous is a joke. They got off on each other's stories. Yeah. That is really well said, Gigi. I love that. She says, sobriety is not true recovery. I have never heard it phrased that way before, and I absolutely love it. That's so spot on. Yep. She says, yeah, sobriety is the first step in recovery. Yeah, I agree completely. And it's so difficult. That's one of the challenges with when we're doing anything compulsively, is there tends to be we all tend to know like this is a problem, and this is why we try to hide it. And so there's so much shame, there's so much embarrassment uh, associated with this. It's, it can be a real challenge for people to get help. And then of course, other people, if they've never struggled with addiction to that degree, then, then it's like, they don't really understand. And, um, and even if they do understand, then it can be really triggering. So it's like, I can't go through this again. Like I stayed with my first husband, as he got sober, I can't do this again. It's too much. And it just burns people out, and just all kinds of challenges there. Local tourist says, is sex addiction real? Some guys just really like it, but does that mean it's an addiction? I think if we look at it in terms of, I think anything can be an addiction, right? Exercise can be an addiction. Work can be an addiction. Eating too much, internet, gaming, anything can be an addiction. So the way I look at it is, just because somebody has kind of this compulsive need to do something doesn't make it okay. And so personally, I think it's one thing to have Dr. George Simon, I think, just really says this best. He really defines it in terms of problematic behavior, looking at it in terms of problematic behavior. And then there's like kind of character disturbed behavior. So for example, it's one thing for a person to, look at a lot of porn, or to want to have, sex with their spouse an excessive amount. That's still a problem. But it takes it to a whole nother level if they're out there sleeping with anybody and everybody, when complete morals go out the window, and in any sense of, the kind of complete lack of regard for their person. And they're, picking up sex workers, and they're, sleeping with everybody in town. That, to me, and I think George Simon would say the same thing, that goes over into character disturbed kind of behavior. And I don't like how sex addiction tends to get a free pass, where it's like, oh, but they're a sex addict, and oh, well, they just need to work on this. If a person's been, the level of deceit and the lying and the sneaking around and the manipulativeness of it all is so extreme with cheating. To me, it's in its own league, and it's outside of the realm of I don't know, workable behavior. So as far as like sticking around, you know what I mean? Like I would never stay with that, because you'd never know, and you're risking your health, because Lord only knows what they're bringing back. Okay, yep. Gigi, I agree completely. She says, addiction whack-a-mole is what I call it. Yep. That's exactly what it is. And that's exactly what happens. You see this where, I was watching a show late last night, because I couldn't sleep, on YouTube. And it was about, weight loss in Great Britain. I fall down all these very strange holes on the internet late at night. But it was very interesting. So this one woman she had been sexually abused as a child and began eating at a fairly young age. And her weight, she was very heavy, 400, 500 pounds. And she ended up getting gastric bypass. So now, okay, yay, right? Food's the problem. We're going to give you gastric bypass, and then that's going to solve it. Well, there's a reason it's not just laziness or gluttony that gets a person to 400 or 500 pounds, or even 300 pounds. Like there's other stuff that's going on there. So sure enough, then she realizes, okay, now if I don't have the food, now I'm just sitting here and I have to sit with my pain. And so she was talking about how this was so profoundly difficult and she didn't anticipate this. And I'm not sure that she had told her counselor about the sexual abuse either. So this just wasn't on anybody's radar. Well, so then as a way to try to cope, then she starts taking pain medications and was taking a substantial amount of like codeine and, some major mixing all kinds of stuff as, and with gastric bypass, for a person to get drunk or to, your whole, everything you metabolize is completely off. So it doesn't take that much alcohol or that many pills to really have a massive effect on a person. So it was exactly that. She just was swapping out one thing for another. And it's, again, it's like whack-a-mole or like the cat in the hat with the spot. You think you get rid of the spot one place and then boom, it's over there. And then you got to go scrub the wall and then you rinse it out in the tub and now it's in the tub. And it's just the stuff, just unless it's directly addressed, it just doesn't go away, it's just so tragic. Okay, let's see. And I agree, that's a very valid point. And Tara says, I think it's one thing to use a diagnosis as an excuse and quite another to use it as an explanation. Yes. And I think the difference between the two is accountability. So we can, a person might have some sort of diagnosis where if they're off their medication or something's going on where it's not an excuse. They're like, you know what? I was not here. Like my illness took over. I was completely, I had a psychotic break, or I was so lost in my addiction that I just, I was acting in ways that it wasn't me. But there's that accountability there of, yes, I realize X, Y, and Z was a problem. This is why it was a problem. This is what I'm going to do different next time. That's the difference. Gigi, you're just on fire tonight. Yes, I agree completely. She says, recovery from addiction is a selfish pursuit, not relational at all. AA, NA, SA are not meant to heal broken relationships affected by addiction. Yes, there's a part, I'm working on a book now called The Narcissist's Playbook. And in it, there's a part about things to think about before you go into couples counseling with a person who's manipulative. And that's one of the points that I address, is that so often people think, because they get so focused on, if this person just gets sober, if they just quit yelling at me, if they can just get this thing ironed out, then everything will be fine. Our relationship will be fine. And you're so spot on, because it's not. Just them getting sober doesn't fix the relationship. All it means is they've gotten sober. And if anything, and with abuse or addiction, that at that point, what tends to happen is the person that's been the spouse of the addict, alcoholic, or abusive person then starts to realize, they start getting in touch with their anger. Because now it's like this person, and it's really not even so much the case with abuse, because it just tends to get progressively worse. But like, addiction or alcoholism, the partner's been so focused on getting them sober, they get sober, and then it's sort of like, oh, you know what? You've caused a lot of hurt and heartache over the past X number of years. And then that anger starts to surface. And then, of course, the person that's been struggling with the alcohol or the addiction, they weren't there, right? Like they were high or they were drunk. They weren't there. So it's they can't really comprehend like the amount of damage that their addictions caused. And so it just, yeah. So them getting sober is just the first step. Now the relationship has to be fixed. And then that takes that takes years to repair all that damage, if it can even be repaired. Because really, when that addiction came into the mix and things became so off kilter, that relationship came to a standstill. And the thing is, what's so sad is that people, when you're in it, you don't realize that it's at a standstill because you're so focused on either trying to fix this other person because you think fixing them will fix the relationship. And then if they get sober, it might be the realization of, oh, we don't even have a relationship. And we haven't had one for a very long time. Okay, let's see here. And this, this too, the kind of therapy and stuff, I think just across the board in everything, it's really important for us to just get clear on where our deal breakers are. So if you've got somebody in your life that has any type of problematic behavior, and especially if you're like, okay, well, you know what, they offered couples counseling. I think we're going to try it. Maybe this time things will be different, what have you, to get very clear about what kind of changes that you're wanting to see and in what time frame. So that way you have an understanding of like where your lines are. I would also say too, and this is again in that book, but if you're considering couples counseling, especially if you've got a person who's abusive in any way, shape, or form, and or manipulative, to the first session discuss with the therapist about laying down some ground rules. I think that's really important. So, and they're rules that both people follow. Dignity and respect, I would say, is one. And then also whatever's said in therapy can't be used against you down the road. And then let me just clarify. I talk about this a little bit, in my book, but let me just clarify that, because manipulative people it's their mindset. They're just going to twist things around to always make it work for them. So when I talk about that, when somebody's using that, it's not okay for what you say in therapy to be used against you. I think first and foremost, I think that's kind of maybe the foundations of adult behavior. But I think this really needs to be said, because if, like we were learning in that book from book club, the author had beautifully said it, something along the lines of, if you're bringing an emotionally immature person into therapy's for a different issue. Like that therapy that person can only advance so far as they are emotionally capable of. So if they're not emotionally mature, that needle's not going to move very much. Like they need to work on gaining that emotional maturity before anything else can really, really happen, frankly. So some of this stuff I think is important to be said. So having this understanding, nothing that you say in therapy will be used against you. And if it is, understanding that that's not okay, especially if it's being used to hurt you. So here's some examples of that. So let's say, for example, you share that your father left when you were 10. And then that's a really painful thing for you. And, your partner knows that because you're in therapy, you're in couples counseling, right? And then the next fight you have, they bring that up and they throw it in your face. Well, I can see why your dad left. You're intolerable. He couldn't live with you either. Ouch, right? That's not okay. That's using information against a person. It's not using information against a person if, for example, something comes up in therapy that you share or they share of, oh, hey, you know what? I started drinking again. Or I I had an affair, or some sort of information that you or they have the realization of, you know what, that's a deal breaker for me. And then you decide, okay, I think I want a divorce, or like I want to break up. And hold on, I gotta sneeze. Excuse me. So for a manipulative person, odds are they are going to be like, well, but you're using what I said against me. I thought we were going to be totally honest in therapy, but you can't do that. And this kind of stuff, it can be hard to kind of navigate these lines, but that's not using that against them. That's being self-protective. And anybody's allowed to have deal breakers at any time. So it would be using it against them if, let's say, for example, they say that they had an affair, and then you say that you want a divorce, but you don't really want a divorce. You just want to punish them. You just want to make them think that you want a divorce. So to punish them for having the affair, then that would be taking what they said and using it against them. But setting boundaries, having deal breakers, that kind of stuff is not using information against a person. Yeah. And Gigi, yes, gosh, yes, she's so right on. She says, abuse is not about a lack of communication. Absolutely. Absolutely. And one of the ways, and that's what gets so many of us tangled up, is because if we don't have this issue with the vast majority of other people in our life, we think it's got to be a miscommunication because it doesn't happen with anybody else, right? So like it's got to be. And then what do? Then we start doubling, tripling up our efforts to try to improve our communication so we can find that solution. But if more communication only ends up causing more confusion, then there's a problem. And abuse for sure. So manipulation is not about a lack of communication. Manipulation is a power struggle. And that's why things don't get resolved. It's because they're not trying to get them resolved. They're trying to win by any means necessary. Shaming, blaming, guilting, shirking accountability, deflecting, you name it, anything for them to get their way, basically. And yes, abuse is also about power and control, and it's has nothing to do with communication. That's why you guys might have heard the saying, you didn't cause the abuse and you can't stop the abuse. And what that means is it's not about your behavior. The abuse is about the person who's being abusive. It's about their behavior. So an abusive person, because there's no boundaries with them, they have this emotionally immature understanding of themselves and other people. To them, because they have a reason, they're like, well, you know what? I got really mad. Yeah, that's why I kicked your car and caused a dent. I got mad. Well, or you didn't buy cat food at the store. That's why I screamed at you. Or, geez, that the baby wouldn't stop crying. That's why I had to shake it. I'm not kidding you. Like it just keeps going. And it's like, well, yes, okay. You might have been frustrated. You might have been upset. You might have been angry, but boundaries, adult behavior, societal boundaries, there's a line. And that line is, it's not okay. It's not okay to become abusive with our anger. It's not okay to become verbally abusive, physically abusive, combative, destroying property, these kinds of things. And people with the understandings of this, don't need to have this explained to them because it's just understood. And so the only kind of quote unquote control that we have over the abuse is being self-protective. And so what that goes back to, okay, knowing when we're being mistreated, and then where are our deal breakers in this? But because this stuff is so insidious, and you can probably see, as I'm explaining this, when we've probably all been on the receiving end of this, where when you're being blamed for something, there's that kernel of truth. Well, I did forget to buy cat food at the store, right? Well, okay, yeah, I forgot to pay that bill. And so this is why targets tend to think I'm to blame. If I had just remembered to pay that bill, if I just remembered to buy cat food at the store, if I knew I shouldn't have talked politics at dinner. I shouldn't have, I knew that they don't like country music, and I played country music, and that's why they yelled. And that this is where the walking on eggshells starts. And we don't even realize it because we think we're being solutions oriented. We think we're being team oriented. We think, well, relationships take work and compromise. And isn't that what I'm doing? And it's that slow descent into hell. And then people, when things get awful, then most people that are in an abusive relationship don't realize that they're being abused. And that's why they think that it's their fault. That's probably the number one thing, top 5. It's in the top 5 things that survivors struggle with is, well, how do you know it's not my fault? Like, but what if I am to blame? And there's that deep-seated fear of there's something profoundly wrong with me. And that's why they treated me like this. And because it's something profoundly wrong with me, now that they're gone, they're going to go live happily ever after with somebody else because I couldn't twist myself into enough of a pretzel to save this relationship. But I hope that you can see as we're explaining this, it helps to kind of untangle this, that it's not you, that their behavior is outrageous and it's wildly inappropriate, and it's their mindset. It's not you. Because we all do things, right? Like we all forget to pay bills. We all forget to get stuff at the cat food store. We all, you have your preferences. Like you like the kind of music you like. But that's where that dignity and respect comes in of like, okay, hey, I don't like country music, but if you do, that's cool because you can. Like you have every right to like whatever you like. But I am gonna, like, can we negotiate? Can we listen to country music on the way to the store? And then on the way back, can we listen to, I don't know, podcasts, talk radio, like whatever, most people can compromise, but abusive people can't because it's just all about power and control. Okay. Let's see. Yeah, Rich is saying, yeah, no compromise. Yeah, and that's a problem. I was thinking the other day about kind of the foundational, it was after book club, I think. Anyways, I was thinking about kind of the foundational components of a relationship and, chemistry, connection, communication, commitment. But this is all within the context of healthy boundaries. Okay. So just let that be. I think everything, we were talking about this last week. We were kind of joking, with fortune cookies, if you guys ever did this, or if you still do this, you add the words in bed at the end of every fortune cookie. So like the one is, I have one right here in front of me. All personal breakthroughs begin with a change in beliefs in bed. Think of that, but but the phrase, instead of the phrase in bed, thinking of it in terms of within the context of healthy boundaries. So anything, any piece of advice, anything that you hear always needs to be, but within the context of healthy boundaries all the time, 100%. Because if we don't have that, this is how things get so skewed, because then people are like, oh, it's commitment's forever. Well, within the context of healthy boundaries, I mean, if you're abusive, you're out cheating, you've stolen, you're just running amok, like, no, it's not forever. that's not what I signed up for, So, but yeah, the communication part, I guess, is what I was going for. Communication part of relationships is huge. And if there's not that ability to have that open, honest, sincere, solutions-oriented communication, that ability to establish that emotional safety, the ability to negotiate with each other and to compromise, and to always have that understanding of dignity and respect, that's everything. That's it. Anything less than that is just going to be a giant headache. Okay, let's see here. Looks like Zachary. Let's see, what did he say? Yeah. Zachary says, hell is what happens when you believe a narcissist's lies and try to see the good. Yeah, it is. It's a path to hell. And it's one of those things, because most people, here's the thing. We all like to think that we're not naive or gullible. And I think the vast majority of the time we're wrong. And it takes a person going through something like this in order to really start questioning things and to cultivate that healthy degree of skepticism. That's what I would say the vast majority of people out there are missing. And just because it hasn't blown up in their face yet doesn't mean that it never will. That's the other challenge, is it's so easy for other people to be like, oh, that'll never happen to me. I would never stay in a relationship. I would never get in a relationship like that. And it's a false sense of security, because we always, we have the benefit of, when we're judging like that, we're on the outside looking in. And it's much easier to see a situation when you're playing, Monday morning quarterback. So, we all tend to kind of think that we'd see these things coming, and generally we're wrong. So until you go through it and then you realize, oh, actually, this is how this goes. And what can be the added level of crazy making with that can be that other people. So then you've got PTSD, right? So like you're out of this, you're completely emotionally dysregulated, you have trouble trusting, or I should say, PTSD symptoms, may or may not have actual PTSD, but you're dysregulated, you have trouble trusting, you're hypervigilant, you're having nightmares, you just feel like an emotional wreck. And so you're trying to get your bearings, and you're struggling because you're like, I don't know, I have a really hard time trusting people and all this. And then what happens? That's when we start getting all of this well-intended bad advice from people. And it's prevalent. I just, I don't know if you could avoid it. It's just, it's so common across the board out there. And it's so easy to just walk into that. And then if you're really second guessing yourself, you're like, well, I don't know. I mean, am I being unreasonable? And I feel like something's off, or I feel like this person's not trustworthy, but what if it's what if they are? What if it's me? What if it's because of my previous relationship? And there's, oh man. And like the danger with that is if we're seeking validation outside of ourselves, we're asking other people that don't have they don't have the full context, and B, they may or may not have healthy boundaries. Odds are they don't. So then that gets us in all kinds of trouble because we can't trust our own judgment. And in order to navigate life, we've got to be able to trust our own judgment and discernment, I should say. Yeah, right. That's a good point. True Seeker says, yeah, we are human. Where is the self-compassion? It's been programmed out. Critically investigate how fair we are with ourselves. Yeah, it is. Self-compassion is everything. It is, because none of us are perfect. None of us start out at the finish line. Life it's a crazy mistake-filled journey. And this is another thing that's not taught is self-compassion. And it's so important because it can be so easy it can feel like we're not being accountable, or that we're somehow not learning the lessons we need to if we give ourselves compassion. And it's so important that we realize, hey, you know what? I did the best I could with the information I had at the time. And that's it. That's all I could have done. Had I known different, I would have done different. I didn't know. Okay, let's see. Yeah, and Gigi says, she says, I think a sex addict will always be an addict, but he or she can heal the root hurts and change their distorted beliefs and behaviors, but most aren't willing to do the work. Yeah. And the challenge with sex addiction, especially if you're talking, having sex with other people it's not your partner, is it also really, sex is such a powerful, creates such a powerful chemical release. There's oxytocin, there's dopamine. It's the ultimate feel. It's like a heroin rush. Like it just feels really good. And that's really difficult. So it's difficult to break that because they're probably going to continue to want to have sex, right? Versus a person who's breaking the heroin addiction, they can just never touch that again. So I would think food addiction to that level would be the same thing. I don't remember who said it. Somebody said it. It was so right on about food addiction, but I would say the same thing goes with sex addiction. It's sort of like having a tiger, a really vicious tiger, and in a cage. And you've got it in a cage, but the downside is with food addiction, you've got to get it out and take it for a walk 3 times a day. And I thought, boy, that is so spot on. And so then everything that goes with that, right? Getting the tiger out of the cage safely, putting it back in the cage safely, taking it for a walk safely, that it doesn't hurt you, that it doesn't hurt anybody else. When we're addicted to stuff that's part of our day-to-day life, I would imagine it's very much like that. It's just very difficult to get a solid handle on it. Let's see. H1 says, yeah, Dana, that rush is momentary, though. It doesn't last. Right. It's the same thing with I would imagine any addiction. So you have shopping, eating, whatever. In the moment, it relieves some sort of anxiety. That's generally why we do what we do, really, in large part. But I think especially with compulsive or addictive behavior, we're doing it to cope with something, and we're doing it to relieve that anxiety. So we feel great in the moment. You buy a new outfit, you have a beer, you whatever. In that moment, you just feel amazing. But then, because then it gets so out of control, it's a problem. And then that's when all of that shame and embarrassment and guilt and really just kind of that self-loathing comes into play. I would say you could even take this to survivors of people that have left abusive relationships and continue to go back to their partners. It's that same kind of thing. They feel addicted to them. It's the trauma bonds. And so it's this feeling, this compulsive behavior. What is wrong with me? I should hate this person. They treated me so terribly, yet they're all I can think about. They consume my every waking moment. I want them back. I miss them. I love them. And then they continue to go back and get hurt, go back and get hurt, go back and get hurt. And then there's all of this shame involved. And wondering, like, what is so wrong with me? Why don't I have the willpower? Why can't I just leave? And for survivors of abuse, there's kind of that added challenge where people don't understand. Because in their mind, they're like, I don't know, this person's hurting you. Like, why would you want to go back? But, it's not that simple. It's just like telling an alcoholic, well, if you want to get sober, you just got to not drink. Or telling a person who's 600 pounds, well, you just got to put down the fork. Well, yeah, but there's a lot that's driving that behavior. That's not so simple. So it's not so simple just to say, well, you got to just, you just got to leave and get on with it. Well, thank you, Captain Obvious. Like, it's a lot more goes into that. Thank you, Grace, for the live stream donation. She says, this information you're giving out, Dana, is beyond valuable. Thank you for talking about these things. You are so very welcome. I'm glad this is helpful. Let's see here. Let me scroll up. Yep. Rich says, yes, his therapist compared his relationship with the narcissist to a heroin addict and said the sexual chemistry is the glue of the relationship, at least for him. Yes, the trauma bond, the pain-pleasure cycle. Yes. And it's so interesting when we kind of start understanding the psychology behind all of this. And I guess you could also say kind of the neuroscience behind all of this, because these trauma bonds are formed primarily through what's known as intermittent reinforcement. And so you have the stress and anxiety of the low times. They give you silent treatment. They're withholding communication or sex, or they are threatening to divorce, or they're doing something. The relationship is now uncertain. Okay. So there's the stress and the anxiety of, I don't know what's going on. Is this relationship going to survive, basically? And then either through our own efforts of ingratiating behavior, or because they have just decided that they're done punishing us, then there's that relief of, oh, thank goodness that's over. Now this relationship can continue. And it's because of that divide between the lows can be so low and the highs can be so high. It doesn't even have to be bad times and good times. It can just be the relief of knowing that the relationship isn't going to end. And it's such an emotional roller coaster that's what forms those bonds. So bonds aren't being formed in healthy ways. They're being formed through these highs and lows. And that's what creates this feeling of, in a relationship, when you're in a relationship with, especially an abusive person, it's sort of like there's me, or there's you, and then there's them, and then there's their behavior. So it's like there's three of you in it. And it creates this kind of, me and you against the world mentality, where it's you and them against their behavior. It's you and them against the world. Nobody understands each other like you guys do, right? Because it feels so intense, and it's so easy to mistake these feelings for love, because they are so intense and so all-consuming, and it's all you can think about. And this person really becomes your whole world. And and then when these relationships end, it can be really confusing because it's so intense. Agatha, the other day, but she also texted me with random stuff. She had made a comment about, she realized it wasn't even the excitement or the intensity so much, it was stimulation. So it's just these extremes. And so relationships after that can feel flat, because there isn't the threat of loss and then the relief that it'll continue. There's not that. So it's interesting. And I don't know if you heard me talk about this, but so I again, 3 a.m. kind of stuff, thinking about these trauma bonds and how powerful they are. I mean, these are the bonds between, like hostages and their captors, between pimps and sex workers, between an abusive spouse and their partner, between cult leaders generally and cult members. Very, very strong bonds. And so anyways, the more I was reading about it, the more I'm like, okay, this is just a very chemical thing. And so what's interesting about this is there's other ways that these kind of bonds are forged throughout our life that are not to this extreme. For example, it gets more bonding to go through boot camp with somebody than it is to be in a book club with them because of trauma bonds. Boot camp is actually a really great example, because it's exactly that. It's this, you've got to join together. It's this fear of this very, builds camaraderie, because it's like, we got to get through this. So there's all these highs and lows, and they're being abused. They're being ground down and turned into a soldier at the end. So it's a very bonding experience versus book club. Hopefully unless you've got an abusive book club leader leading the show. But if it's, normal run-of-the-mill book club, it's so even keel that there is none of that intensity present. The members will then go, if they get tired of book club, they're going to go on their own way. Versus if there's some traumatic person involved, those situations tend to stick in our mind. So it's interesting. And also the concept of trauma bonds, the understanding behind it, it's the fear and then the relief, right? That can happen in more constructive ways. So let's say, for example, you have kind of a strained relationship with your child of any age, or a strained friendship even. So using this concept of trauma bonds, if you go see a scary movie together, go on a roller coaster, go to one of those, what do they call them? Like puzzle rooms. I always want to call them panic rooms, but I don't think that's what they're called. You know what I'm saying? Like the rooms where you solve puzzles. Drawing a blank. These kinds of things where you're working under pressure, where there is this intensity, the different challenge courses that are out there, where there's a whole jungle gym thing outside where you're walking across, tree trunks that are way up, 30 feet up in the air, and you've got to jump to a trapeze and all this kind of stuff. That creates it. It's a lesser form of a trauma bond, but that's why that stuff is so bonding. Escape room. Thank you. Thank you guys. Yeah, whitewater rafting. That's another good example. Anything where there are these highs and lows. So I think we can use that in a constructive way, especially if, like I said, if a parent, for the parents in here that are struggling to really connect with their child, if there's parental alienation going on, those kinds of things can really help to rebuild a relationship. They can really go a long way. Yes, I agree. H1 says, Dana, I think the abuser purposefully makes sure that the target is hooked on them as quickly as possible. That's why it seems so intense. Yes, I think it depends on how intentional and malicious and exploitative they are. I think best case scenario, you're talking about a very emotionally immature person who just wants what they want. And so, you see this with small children. 5-year-olds have this down. They're masters at this, where they lay on the charm and they will tell you everything that you've ever wanted to hear in order to get what they want. And it's to rope you in, right? And if you even show that you're close to cracking, they're just going to keep laying it. They get louder, their eyes get bigger, they get more pitiful. And it's so hard to say no to all of that cuteness, and then the guilt, then the charm and all of it. So, so adult manipulators are the same way. If they're emotionally immature, it's using, especially if those are the initial tactics, right? They're using kind of niceness or love bombing, these kinds of things in order to get their way. If they're intentional, if they're malicious and they're predatory, these kinds of things, then yes, I do believe it's very calculated. I think a good example of that is online dating scammers. So they pretty much have templates of emails to send to people, and right out of the gate, they're telling you everything. They're telling you all of these things in order to get you to drop your defenses. I am, let's say you meet them on, I don't know, Christian Mingle, right? They're going to start hammering away at any little thing. They're going to, I would imagine, focus on morals and values. And they're going to talk about how they are a good Christian man or woman and that they really want a serious relationship. And, they believe in commitment is forever and, blah, blah, blah. And then, of course, it's always a little bit off, right? Like they're just, it's off. But then the communication is excessive. It's all of these really intense long emails. It's, they want you to email them back all of the time. They are very quick to make you the center of their world. And it's because they know that you're not going to give a stranger $10,000, right? But you will give somebody $10,000 if you think that they're going to be your fiance. So they establish that trust and that connection, and that's how they get people. Let's see here. Yeah, that's a very valid point. Truth Seeker says real connection threatens narcissism. Yeah. And for possibly a wide variety of reasons, right? So let's say, for example, a person has put up walls, let's say these kind of this degree of ooh, sorry, that was loud. Kind of their degree of self-absorption comes from a place let's say they grew up in an abusive home, and as a way to protect themselves, they learned loving a person, that love equals hurt, right? And that connection equals hurt, and that it's every man for himself kind of a thing. If these were the messages that they got, then those same types of emotions are just off the table. So I'd mentioned the other day, I'd heard somebody had said, oh, basically everybody, at the end of the day, everybody wants to be loved. And I don't think that's the case. I think there's a window of time that everybody needs to be loved. Like the first 3 to 7 years of a person's life, for sure. The first, year, people need love. They need touch. They need skin to skin contact. Babies need this kind of stuff. If they don't, then there's profound issues that come from that. You've got attachment disorders. Babies can die. There's a whole failure to thrive if there's not that. So there's definitely a very set time in our lives where we need this. And then as we get older, it's kind of thought up to the age of 7, from the ages of consciousness to whatever you want to say, like 1 year to 7 years, that really forms our personality. And then kind of after that, it's just us being us. But if a person's uncomfortable with love as an adult, giving them love isn't going to somehow break their shell and get them to open up. It's going to make them lash out. So for a lot of, I think you could even say for a lot of emotionally immature people to begin with, just like that book, I just can't say enough good things about that book. I just absolutely loved it. It's in the room. The book I'm talking about is Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents. Fantastic book. But if a person's not familiar, if they're just not on that frequency, they're just not, and this is not like a better than, worse than, I'm not even going there with this, but it's just it's on a different plane of understanding completely. So for that, for so many of us, it's sort of like, well, but if I continue trying to love them, and I can someday earn their love, right? If I just put up with enough stuff, if I just love them enough, if I just do all of these things for them, then someday their shell's going to have to crack, and I'll have this wonderful relationship with them. And it's like, some people just, that's not even on the menu. It's just not something that they want. And it's not a matter of finding the right person. They just aren't comfortable with experiencing these emotions. Just like so many of us are not comfortable with experiencing anger, our own anger or somebody else's anger. But and think of it this way too. Even for those of us that have the awareness of, yes, okay, I need to learn how to get comfortable with conflict, again, within the context of healthy boundaries, right? Appropriate conflict, appropriate confrontation, appropriate anger. These are the things that I need to become comfortable with. If you have that insight and if you have that desire, you have that motivation, it's still difficult, and it takes tons of practice to even get to a level of basic proficiency. And then you think about a person who has no insight that they have a problem, they have no desire to change, and they don't self-reflect. How that needle's not going to move very far. It's not going to move. What's going to happen? Because you're right. There's no motivation, there's no desire, there's no insight for that to happen. Oh, Maluk said, laughing, she says, "Oh, my 5-year-old grandson is a master manipulator." Yes, they all are, aren't they? They're so stinking cute and they know it. Let's see here. Um, uh, between asks, have you heard of prey eyes versus hunter eyes? I definitely am all too familiar with predatory gaze, but I have not heard of prey eyes. Would You're talking like predator and prey, right? Like the predatory gaze is incredibly intense. And it can feel, I mean, it can, if we're talking like a romantic partner, it can feel, it can really make a person feel loved and special because they're just zeroed in on you. And really, they're just locked on target, is what it is. And Kootenai Mom says, what are the stages that we go through after we discover narcissistic abuse? Do we go down rabbit holes and how do we get out? And do you think it happens naturally? Okay, that's a very, oh, God, I forgot my timer went off. That's a big question. I covered this in, actually, I need to make a note because I should add some stuff to it. I should probably I need to just do a whole different book about it because the book that I'm working on, it just keeps getting longer and longer and longer because there's so much to all of this. Rabbit holes. So I'll tell you a few of them. So anyways, actually real quick, the book that I'm working on called The Narcissist Playbook, the end of that book, I list out, again, my opinion, I have a support group with over 50,000 people in it. I have seen and heard, tens of thousands of stories of other people. And something would have to be wrong with me to not notice patterns over the 4+ years I've been doing this with this many people. So in the back of the book, I have it listed out from what I have noticed and what I've also experienced, the different phases of healing that people go through, and the different challenges at each stage, and what I see, and again, what I've experienced, where people tend to get tripped up and why. So it's just so much easier to have that kind of spelled out. And of course, your journey may vary, but I will tell you, I don't think it's going to vary all that much. This is pretty much a really solid basic map that so far I feel like it's applied to everybody, male, female, any age, any walk of life. It just, these are the things that trip people up. So, yeah, I need to finish this and then I'll talk about it. And then I'll be able to talk about it more. But yes, so the different rabbit holes. So part of that, I would say the first rabbit hole that people tend to go down is that they discover that narcissism is a thing. And the reason that tends to be the first major rabbit hole, it's their first awareness that other people are not like them, and that problematic behavior can be so persistent and pervasive in another person that it can be a personality disorder. So that's a very big aha moment for a lot of people, because we all tend to walk around thinking that we could spot a dangerous person, and we generally cannot. So that's a big thing. Like, oh my gosh, I thought it was just me, you know, yeah, this makes total sense. Like this, yes, this behavior is incredibly, that I experienced was like outrageous, like Lifetime TV movie level kind of stuff. This is way outside the realm of any like normal bad behavior. That's one of the first levels of awareness, the first rabbit hole. The second rabbit hole tends to be about trying to think of, could I be friends with the narcissist, or could I be friends with this kind of problematic person? And then it's sort of this awareness of, oh, okay, well, what are my boundaries and standards for other people in my life? And then it kind of expands our understanding, because at first people tend to think, oh, no, it's just this one person. It's just this one relationship in my life. That's the total train wreck. That's it. Everything else is fine. And then as they start learning about all of the different forms of abuse, boundaries, problematic behavior in general, manipulation, their eyes start to open and they're like, oh my gosh, this actually describes quite a few of the close relationships I've been in. And so then they start kind of seeing the bigger picture. So their circle of awareness expands outward. Then one of the challenges with that is then they start doubting themselves. What's wrong with me? Especially if they're still, and understandably hung up on the label of narcissist. What's wrong with me? I'm seeing narcissists everywhere. This can't be. So I must have the problem. But then if you can kind of get them to back up a little bit, and it's like, okay, just think about this in terms of problematic behavior, take away the label. Like the label helps you to get to that first step. But then I really feel like there is a certain point where it causes more confusion than it, does clarity. Sort of like a butterfly. Like once, like the butterfly net helps you catch the butterfly, but once you have the butterfly, you no longer need the net, kind of a thing. So, yeah, then examining like the larger picture of relationships, that tends to go on for quite a while. People are connecting the dots, and then it just starts expanding. They're just understanding of behavior in general. And then this is where it gets really cool. Then it's this whole like waking up process where they kind of are climbing out of the rubble of everything. And then it's just like, oh my God, I didn't realize I was trusting people way too quickly. And I didn't realize when I was being mistreated. And I didn't realize that these certain, people pleasing and these certain things were even an issue, but oh my gosh, they totally are. And that's when it's cool, because then they start really kind of coming to life and reconnecting with who they are. And then that third rabbit hole is really that deep awareness into themselves. And then that, like I said, that's just really cool. So then when they can get on the other side of that, it's really, that's where that whole, it's a term like post-traumatic growth. So it's growth that only happens from trauma. So, and that is a thing. So we have post-traumatic stress, right? That's stress that's caused due to trauma. And then we also, which is extreme stress, right? But post-traumatic growth is extreme growth that only happens from trauma. So when I say that, yes, I mean this with every ounce of my being, when we have people at this stage, you really have to go through, you have to have your whole world blown to pieces in order for this growth to happen. Again, at least at this stage of mental health awareness. Hopefully, in 20, 40, 50 years, it won't be like this. It won't have to be this extreme. But right now, yes, because the stuff is not taught at the level that it needs to be taught. And even then, I don't even know if it would, how preventative it would be, because it's this learning about it and living it are two very, very different things. So, but yeah, it's cool. So there definitely is the stage in this where you can come out of this for hands down for the better. It doesn't have to be staying blown apart the rest of your life. Like, that, and you probably heard me talk about this. Like, this is one of the coolest things about having your life blown apart, is that you consciously get to choose which pieces you want to rebuild with. That's powerful. And of course, nobody's going to do that willingly. Nobody's going to just destroy their life to go about that process. That's the power of this trauma. It allows us to rebuild. But now we're able to rebuild with this new level of awareness. It's just, it's painful, but man, it's powerful. It really is. Okay, I just wanted to see the prey eyes and predator eyes real quick, just for my own curiosity. Hold on a second. And then we'll do our guided meditation. So let me see. Tiffany, let's cover, this is a really great question, and it's a bigger answer than people might think. But I'm going to copy and paste it, and we're going to talk about it next week. Okay. That her question is, does a narcissist ever face karma? So I've got let's go make for a good conversation. Okay. Oh, that's interesting. Okay, so the predator and prey eyes, Between was saying the predator eyes are also used by models to inhibit attraction. Let's see, that keep your eyebrows lowered because raised eyes or prey eyes are a sign of prey for predators. Is it kind of like a startle, like that kind of a thing? Is that prey eyes? look of shock, deer in headlights kind of a thing? The freeze, I guess it would be freeze, right? Your freeze response. When I was in nursing school, one of the things, you learn some weird stuff. One of the things that we were taught there is, two of the things, nurse face. So it's because people will tell you anything and everything. And in order to kind of to allow, for comfort for people to be able, because you want people to tell you deeply personal things so you can provide care, right? But you've got to practice keeping your face neutral and not getting thrown off when they tell you some really outrageous stuff. So that was one thing that was interesting. And then the other thing was kind of this predatorial, they call it nurse walk. And it's that almost, I would say it's more, I don't want to say model walk, but walking with intention and purpose. And so it's like you're walking like you're on a mission, and then it just sends the vibe for other people to not bother you. So like if you're really busy and you've got, 14 patients and you're running around, and of course people think that you're a nurse and that, like you get pulled in all different kinds of directions. When you had that intensity, that purpose, people left you alone. So it's interesting. It's the same kind of predatory thing, not, but you know what I mean? It's intentional. But yeah. Okay. And real quick too, Fairy Magic says that, says the downside of support groups is they can sometimes be the source of not of healing due to focusing on the problems. Yes. And so one of what we've done with our support group. So we really have 3, I would say, going right now. So there's one on my website, there's one on Facebook, and then there's another one that we have on Facebook called 365 I Thrive. And so the Thrive After Abuse group on Facebook is for, anybody, like anybody in their stages of healing. But there is a lot of talk about what happened. And so that can be very triggering and re-traumatizing and very highly emotional. The 365 I Thrive group is 100% about us. So it's about boundaries, standards, deal breakers, our finding our power and control, kind of moving forward, practicing setting boundaries. It's not about anything to do with anybody else, really. It's about us. So for that reason. So, and just if you are already in, so what people do is if they're still at that in-between stage of healing, which is very normal and common, is they'll be in both groups, and then they'll use the Thrive After Abuse group to vent, to get clarity, to whatever. But then they use the 365 group for positive stuff about them. So it's a different environment, but it allows, both of them are closed groups. Omaluk asks. And if you are a member of the Thrive After Abuse group, Facebook has it where you can apply to the 365 group and then automatically get in. So we've already screened you once. We don't need to screen you again. So, and we're trying to do some different things too. I promise, we're doing guided meditation thing in 3 minutes. But we're trying to do some different things in the different groups where every single day is something Thrive related, which I think can apply to any of us at any stage in healing. So Monday, for example, is Motivational Mondays, where people can post anything motivational. Tuesdays is, Transformational Tuesdays. Like, how have you changed? What have you transformed, or how have you changed in the past week? Wednesdays is Share Your Wins Wednesday. So people can share any success, large or small. Thursdays is Thankful Thursday. So what are you thankful for? Friday is Off Topic, is Funny Friday. Just anything funny, anything goes. Saturday is Self-Awareness Saturday, and the questions rotate. And they're all geared. They all come from my insight journal that I wrote. And so it's, kind of like, how are you feeling right now and why? What has been the biggest challenge you faced this week and why? What is a decision that you've put off making lately and why? These kinds of things. So it's geared to develop self-awareness. Sunday, what is Sunday? I do not remember what Sunday is. Self-awareness, self-care. Sunday is self-care Sunday. So kind of listing out, what have you done for self-care? What are you going to do that day for self-care? Or what have you done that week for self-care? And of course, I think it's really valuable because then you're also reading the responses of other people, and it can kind of jog your own thinking about, hey, I never thought of that. Like, I'm going to go do that too. So it's cool. Mark, that's another big question we will answer. We'll go over next week. Okay. He asks, do narcissists ever change? Some great questions. Okay. So with that said, I know we are over on time. Sam, real quick, says, where do we do these? These are in the Facebook groups. So you might, well, either one, Sam. There's Thrive After Abuse, the group. There's also the page. That's different. There, Thrive After Abuse, the group, or 365 I Thrive, the group, is where all these different things are being posted. Okay, so with that said, because we're way over on time, I apologize. Let's go into our guided meditation, and then we'll be done for tonight. And then I'll see you guys next week, or I'll see you in the group. So take some time. Let's just settle in to being here in this moment. Oh, gosh, my neck. So if you are laying down, take some time to get comfortable and settle in. And if you're sitting down, take some time to get comfortable and settle in. Allowing yourself to take several deep breaths in through your nose and out through your mouth. Allowing yourself to settle in to this moment. Releasing any anxiety you may have about the future, any anger or regret about the past. Realizing that you can pick up those emotions later, but for right now, we're just going to be fully present in the moment. That there is so much that is right about the moment, this moment. In this very moment, you are safe, and it is okay to relax. Feeling what all is involved in this present moment. Noticing the temperature of the air, if it's warm or if it's cool. Noticing the heaviness of your body as you begin to relax. Noticing the feel of any fabric on your skin. Noticing if there's any tightness in any muscles. And turning your attention inward until you can notice your heart beating. Becoming fully present with yourself in this moment. Continuing to breathe. With each breath in through your nose, allowing it to travel deep down into the bases of your lungs, down into your stomach. Allowing your whole chest to rise and then fall with each exhale. Now bringing your attention to the top of your forehead. And as we slowly make our way down, releasing any and all tension that you may find. Relaxing your forehead, your eyebrows, your eyes, your cheeks and your jaw, allowing your face to become heavy as all of the different muscles in it relax. Allowing your tongue to fall from the roof of your mouth, and letting your jaw hang open. Relaxing the back of your neck, your shoulders, feeling the weight of your arms as you allow your shoulders to relax. Relaxing your arms, your forearms, your hands and your fingers. Allowing your arms to fall into whatever position is the most comfortable. Relaxing your chest and your stomach. Releasing any tension, any knots in your stomach that you may have. Relaxing your hips and your thighs. Allowing your legs to fall into whatever position is the most comfortable for you. Relaxing your calves, and your feet and your toes. Allowing your feet and toes to fall into whatever position is the most comfortable. And again, feeling the weight of your body as you relax completely. Now noticing with each inhale how deep that breath goes as your chest rises and falls. Easily and effortlessly. Deep breath in and deep exhale out. Let's visualize a waterfall off in the distance. And you can hear the water as it comes tumbling over those rocks. You can see the mist rising, that beautiful kind of clear silver color that's coming from that waterfall. And as you walk towards it, having the realization that this place is safe and that you are safe and that it's okay to release anything that you're ready to release. It might be helpful to visualize some emotions that you might have been carrying around, such as anger, fear, stress, any emotion like that. Visualize carrying it in a backpack. And visualize yourself setting down that backpack. You know exactly where it is. It's not going to move. And when we're done, you can go over and you can pick it back up if you would like. But for right now, we're going to just be in the present moment, paying attention to how good it feels to take that backpack off, to feel so light, to realize that it's okay. It's okay to relax. It's okay to have fun. It's okay to do something enjoyable, even though we've all been through a lot of pain. So as you continue moving towards that waterfall, feeling that mist getting closer, gently spraying your skin with the water. As you walk underneath that waterfall, visualize that water, that healing, cleansing water, just washing away anything that you're ready to let it wash away. Anything uncomfortable, any problem you might have that you're carrying, allowing that water to easily and effortlessly just wash over you. And as you pass through that waterfall and arrive on the other side, perhaps you visualize this space as only yours, and that you're the only person there, and that this is just time for you to take a breath and regroup. Or perhaps you visualize quite a few people on the other side, all emotionally safe, supportive people, perhaps people that are in the chat tonight. Being able to smile and laugh and just connect, realizing that you're not alone in any of this. Also realizing that there is so much that is right about you. Allowing yourself to take some time and just feel how it feels to connect with that goodness, with that lightness and the laughter and other people that you might have seen week after week that can all relate. And let's take a few moments now and just sending some gratitude and appreciation to any of the supportive or emotionally safe people. Again, it might be in your real life or your everyday life, or it might be in the chat. Whoever it might be. Just connecting to that. Realizing that there truly is so much that is good and right with you and with the world. And when you're ready, go ahead and open your eyes and come on back. So thank you guys so much for joining me and us. And I will see you next Wednesday at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So I hope to see you then. You'll have a wonderful rest of your week. And as always, lots of love to you guys. You are not alone. You are not crazy. and you really can move forward and heal from this. So take care, and I will talk to you soon. Okay. Good night.